The wind howled like a forsaken lover, carving secrets into the endless white shroud of the tundra. Nisara Feld's wrists burned where the iron bit deepest, the chains rattling like brittle bones against the post that anchored her to this frozen exile. She was 21 winters old, an Omega whose spirit had always whispered against the pack's iron laws, and now that defiance had stripped her bare, not just of clothes, torn away in the ritual circle under the indifferent eyes of the elders, but of dignity, of breath itself. The blizzard descended upon the northern fringes of Eldridge Pack's territory with the fury of a goddess scorned, its flakes slicing her skin like 1,000 silver blades. Blood welled in thin rivulets from the welts on her arms, freezing into crimson icicles that dangled like forbidden jewels, catching the faint gleam of the moon hidden behind roiling clouds. She had refused the mating, not out of pride, though the pack called it that, but because the beta they offered reeked of stale ambition and hollow vows. Her body, they said, was the pack's to claim, a vessel for alliances forged in the shadow of survival. "Disposable," the Alpha had growled, his voice a thunder that echoed through the longhouse as they dragged her from the warmth of the firs. The villagers, her neighbors, her kin, had turned away, their silence a heavier chain than the metal that now bound her. No one spoke for the Omega who dreamed beyond her station. No one dared. The cold seeped into her marrow. A lover's touch turned cruel. Her toes, numb and blackened at the edges, curled futilely against the snow-packed earth. Each gust of wind clawed at her exposed flesh, the chill blooming across her chest like frost flowers on a grave. She could feel her heartbeat slowing, a distant drum in the cage of her ribs, sinking with the rhythmic creak of the post against the gale. Above, the moon fought to pierce the storm, its pale light fracturing on the undulating drifts that buried her calves, then her knees. Hours blurred into an eternity of white agony. The village walls, mere shadows in the distance, offered no mercy, no flicker of torchlight to summon her back. In the haze of her fading vision, memories surfaced like ghosts in the snow. Her mother's locket, a silver crescent etched with the Deusa's rune, had been ripped from her neck during the binding, a symbol of the old ways, the lunar paths that whispered of hidden gifts in Omegas like her. They called it superstition now, in this pack hardened by endless winters and raids from rival clans. But Nisara had felt it stir within her once, a warmth like embers under ice, guiding her through fog-shrouded hunts when others faltered. That gift, unspoken and unproven, had marked her as other, as dangerous. And so they left her here to become one with the tundra's embrace. The storm's roar drowned the distant weavos of the pack's wolves, patrolling the borders as if her suffering were just another night's vigil. Her lips cracked and bled as she whispered a prayer to the Deusa, the words lost to the wind. "Let the moon remember me." But the cold answered instead, wrapping tighter, pulling her eyelids down like heavy veils. Her breath came in shallow gasps, misting the air before crystallizing into fleeting specters. She imagined the snow as a shroud, soft and final, erasing the bruises from the ritual, the sting of betrayal. What was strength if not enduring this quiet unraveling? Mercy, she thought dimly, was a myth for those who never tasted chains. Time fractured. The wind shifted, carrying the faint tang of smoke. Torches? No, too distant, too wild. Then, a shadow loomed through the blizzard's veil. Not the pack's hunters come to claim her corpse, but something larger, forged in the fires of war. Hoofbeats thudded like heartbeats against the frozen ground, muffled yet insistent. Nisara lifted her head, ice cracking from her lashes, and saw him. A figure on a steed, black as midnight, cloaked in furs matted with the grime of battlefields far south. His armor gleamed dully under the storm's assault, silver plates etched with the ancient sigils of the Ironwood lineage, thorns entwined with wolves' heads. Alpha King Valen Ironwood, 38 and scarred by a crown heavier than any blade, reigned in his mount yards from the post. His eyes, storm gray and piercing, cut through the whiteout to find her. He was no stranger to the cruelties of packs. War had taught him the rot that festered beneath oaths of loyalty. But this desecration of the vulnerable, stirred something primal in his chest, a rage tempered by the guilt that had shadowed him since the fall of his own borders 2 winters past. He had ridden through the night, evading assassins from the rival Stormclaw alliance, his mind a tempest of strategy and regret. The pack's borders were meant to be sanctuary, not slaughter. Dismounting with the grace of a predator, he approached, his boots sinking into the drifts. The wind whipped his dark hair, streaked with silver like veins of ore in stone, and revealed the deep scar tracing his jaw, a mark from a betrayal that still haunted his dreams. Up close, Nisara saw the weariness in his broad frame, the way his gloved hand rested on the hilt of a sword that had tasted too much blood. He said nothing at first, his gaze tracing the chains, the frozen blood, the defiance flickering in her half-lidded eyes. "You breathe still," he murmured, voice low as the rumble of thunder over mountains, laced with a melancholy that spoke of thrones built on ashes. He drew a dagger, its blade catching a stray moonbeam, and severed the irons with precise fury. They clattered to the snow, freeing her arms to collapse against her sides. Gently, as if handling fragile porcelain forged in fire, he shrugged off his cloak and wrapped it around her shivering form, the fur's warmth a shock against her skin. As he lifted her, effortless, her weight nothing to his battle-hardened strength, the first flakes of easing snow dusted his shoulders like benedictions. Rage simmered in his veins, not blind, but judicial, a king's verdict forming in the silence. The pack's longhouse lights winked mockingly in the distance, oblivious to the storm they had unleashed. Nisara's head lolled against his chest, the steady thud of his heart a counterpoint to her weakening pulse. In that moment, carried toward the firelight of his encampment beyond the ridge, she felt the stirrings of something ancient, a connection born not of pity, but of shared exile from the world's cruelties. Yet as consciousness ebbed, a whisper of fear coiled in her gut. Who was this king? This stranger whose touch ignited embers in her frozen core? And what judgment would his flames bring upon the dawn? The fire's embrace was a deception, warm only in illusion, as Valen laid Nisara upon a bed of thick furs within the shadowed mouth of his encampment cave. The storm had relented to a mournful whisper outside, leaving the world draped in crystalline silence. But inside, the air hummed with the crackle of flames licking at resinous pine logs. His hands, calloused from years of wielding both sword and scepter, moved with unexpected tenderness, peeling back the sodden cloak to assess the damage wrought by the pack's cruelty. Her skin, mottled with frostbite's cruel kiss, gleamed pale under the torchlight, veins like rivers of ice beneath the surface. She shivered uncontrollably, teeth chattering in rhythm with the distant drip of melting snow from the cavern's jagged ceiling. Valen Ironwood paused, his gray eyes shadowed by the weight of unspoken wars. He had seen atrocities on blood-soaked fields from the southern marches to the frozen peaks of Eldridge, but this Omega's suffering carved deeper, echoing the ghosts of his own failures. 2 winters ago, under a similar moon, he had failed to protect his queen from a traitor's blade, her blood staining the throne room like spilled wine. Guilt was his constant companion, a chain heavier than any forged in iron. Yet here, in this stranger's fragile form, he glimpsed a defiance that mirrored his own buried resolve. He draped a heated pelt over her, the steam rising like spirits from a sacred rite, and knelt to chafe warmth back into her limbs. "Rest easy," he said, his voice a low timbre that resonated off the stone walls, carrying the faint lilt of ancient northern tongues. "The night holds no claim on you yet." Nisara's eyes fluttered open, the world sharpening into focus through a haze of pain and bewilderment. His face hovered close, etched with lines that spoke of battles won and lost, the scar along his jaw a silver thread in the fire's glow. She recoiled instinctively, the chain's phantom bite making her flinch from his touch, even as gratitude warred with suspicion in her chest. Who was this king, materializing from the blizzard like a specter of the Deuce's wrath? His scent enveloped her, smoke and pine, mingled with the metallic tang of distant blood, stirring an unwelcome pull in her core, primal and unbidden. Omegas were taught to yield to alphas, but she had shattered that lesson in the ritual circle, and now fear coiled tight. Was this rescue or another cage? "The pack!" she rasped, her throat raw as flayed hide, pushing herself up on elbows that trembled like saplings in gale. The cave's confines pressed in, walls veined with quartz that caught the firelight in prismatic shards, illuminating scattered maps and a half-drawn sword upon a crude table. Outside, the wind carried faint huevos, not the pack's familiar cadence, but something wilder, perhaps his own guards patrolling the ridge. "They left me for the snow. You? Why?" Valen's hand stilled on her arm, the warmth of his palm seeping through her skin like sunlight-piercing clouds. He met her gaze, unflinching, though melancholy flickered in his depths like embers dying in ash. "Because justice demands it," he replied, rising to stir a pot of steaming broth over the flames, the aroma of herbs and venison cutting through the damp chill. "I am Valen Ironwood, king of the fractured realms beyond these wastes. Your pack's borders touch my scouting lines. Their betrayal reached my ears on the wind, but this—" He gestured vaguely toward the storm-lashed entrance where snow drifts piled like accusing witnesses. "This is no justice. It is rot, festering under oaths they swore to the moon and the Deusa." She watched him, curiosity gnawing at the edges of her fear. His movements were deliberate, a warrior's economy masking the weariness of one who carried a kingdom's sins. As he pressed a tin cup of broth to her lips, she sipped warily, the liquid burning a path to her hollow belly, reviving sensations she had thought lost. The connection hummed between them, instinctive as the tides pull to the moon. Yet she denied it, rationalizing it as survival's trick. He was a king, marked by power's cruel etchings. She, a discarded Omega, her hidden gift. The Pathfinder's intuition that once guided lost hunters through blizzards, now dormant under layers of betrayal. "You risk war for a nameless exile," she murmured, setting the cup aside, her voice gaining strength. "What curse drives you to this?" A shadow crossed his features, the fire casting elongated dances on the cave walls. He settled across from her, the space between them a chasm bridged only by the hearth's glow. "No curse, only echoes of my own." His words came measured, laced with the sorrow of confessions long withheld. "I returned from the Stormclaw fronts, where alliances crumble like ice under claw. Assassins dog my trail, and packs like yours trade loyalty for scraps. But your eyes hold the old fire, the one the Deusa kindles in the Forsaken." He paused, the air thickening with unspoken truths, as if the flames themselves leaned in to listen. Before she could probe further, a low growl echoed from the entrance, freezing them both. Valen's hand flew to his sword, body coiling like a wolf sensing prey. Through the veil of falling snow, shapes emerged, 3 figures in ragged furs, betas from her pack, their eyes gleaming with feral intent. Scouts, come to reclaim what they deemed lost property or silence a witness to their shame. "The Omega lives," one snarled, breath fogging the air, axes glinting in the torchlight. "The Alpha demands her head." Nisara's heart thundered, terror surging anew, but Valen's presence anchored her, his stance a bulwark against the encroaching night. He stepped forward, shielding her without a word, the bond forging in that shared peril, empathy blooming from the soil of mutual exile. As steel met steel in the cave's maw, the clash ringing like a dirge. She felt the stirrings of trust, fragile as new frost. What was redemption, if not choosing to stand beside the broken? The skirmish ended swiftly, bodies crumpling into the snow like fallen leaves, but the echo of violence lingered, binding them closer in the fire's watchful gaze. Valen returned, bloodied but unbowed, and in his eyes she saw not just a king, but a man seeking absolution through her survival. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The cave's shadows lengthened as dawn's first hesitant light filtered through the snow-choked entrance, painting the stone walls in hues of muted silver and rose. Nisara lay curled beneath the firs, her body a map of aches, throbbing welts from the chains, the raw sting of frost-kissed skin, but alive, impossibly so, in the aftermath of the night's violence. The air hung heavy with the scent of blood and pine smoke, the three intruders' forms now shrouded under a hasty layer of snow outside, their axes abandoned like broken promises. Valen's doing, she knew, his sword's whisper ending their pursuit before it could drag her back to the pack's maw. She watched him now from the corner of her eye as he cleaned his blade by the dying fire, the steel gleaming like a sliver of moon in his steady grip. Blood flecked his tunic, dark and accusing, yet his movements carried no triumph, only the quiet resolve of a man who had long ago learned that survival tasted of ash. The bond between them stirred again, unbidden, a thread of warmth weaving through her chest amid the chill. It was not the blind pull of omega instinct she had been taught to fear, but something deeper, forged in the shared glare of peril, a recognition of fractures in each other's armor. He had shielded her without demand, his body a wall against the beta's snarls, and in that moment fear had cracked open to reveal curiosity's fragile bloom. Rising on unsteady legs, Nisara tested her strength, the cave floor cold beneath her bare feet, gritty with remnants of the skirmish. The heated pelt slipped from her shoulders, but she caught it, clutching the fur like a talisman against the vulnerability that still gnawed at her edges. "You fought for a stranger," she said, her voice a threadbare whisper, carrying the weight of questions unspoken. "They were pack, my pack. Blood ties you sever with ease." Valen sheathed his sword, the click echoing like a verdict in the confined space. He turned to her, his gray eyes reflecting the ember's glow, lines of weariness etching deeper across his brow. The scar on his jaw caught the light, a reminder of wounds that time could not fully heal. "Blood is no chain if it binds only cruelty," he replied, his tone laced with the melancholy of one who had buried too many loyalties. He stepped closer, not invading, but offering space for her to bridge, his presence a steady anchor in the storm's lingering hush. "I have seen packs like yours devour their own from within. The Stormclaw Wars taught me that true allegiance is earned in mercy, not enforced by iron." Outside, the wind sighed through the pines, carrying the faint, acrid tang of smoke from distant hearths, the village, oblivious or defiant, stirring to mourning. Nisara's pulse quickened at the thought, memories of the elders' cold gazes flooding back like meltwater from thawing ice. She had been their sacrifice, a pawn in rituals that masked ambition as tradition. Yet here, in this king's shadowed refuge, she felt the stirrings of agency, a quiet rebellion against the role they had carved for her. The Pathfinder's gift, dormant since childhood, flickered at the edges of her awareness, a subtle intuition, like threads of moonlight guiding through fog. It had saved her once, leading lost hunters home when blizzards erased the trails, but the pack had branded it heresy, a threat to their rigid hierarchies. As if sensing her inner tumult, Valen gestured to the cave's rear, where a narrow fissure led to a hidden alcove. "Come. The ridge offers vantage. We cannot linger if more come. His words were not command, but invitation, tempered by the guilt that shadowed his every choice. He had lost realms to betrayal, his queen's death a specter that whispered of failures he could not atone. This Omega, with her defiant spark, mirrored that loss, another soul cast aside by the world's merciless grind. Protecting her felt like grasping at redemption, a thread to pull him from the abyss. They moved together through the fissure, the air growing sharper, laced with the mineral bite of underground streams. Nisara's bare feet padded silently on the damp stone, her senses sharpening as the Pathfinder's whisper awakened fully. It was no grand vision, but a pull, an instinctive map unfolding in her mind, tracing safe paths through the labyrinthine caves that honeycombed the ridge. "This way," she murmured, surprising herself, her hand brushing his arm in guidance. The touch sent a jolt through her, electric as lightning over snow, but she pressed on, leading him past crumbling ledges where lesser eyes would falter. Valen followed, his breath steady behind her, though surprise flickered in his eyes. The cave twisted upward, emerging onto a windswept overlook where the tundra stretched like a vast, undulating sea. Below, the village huddled against the mountain's flank, its longhouse a squat shadow amid thatched roofs dusted white. Smoke curled from chimneys, lazy and untroubled, but Nisara's gift revealed more. Faint trails of scent on the wind, scouts circling the perimeter, their intent a dark undercurrent to the morning's calm. "They're searching," she said, her voice gaining clarity, the intuition blooming like frost flowers under the rising sun. "Not just for me, for you. Whispers of a king in our borders, ripe for alliance or ambush." He knelt beside her, his cloak brushing her side, the proximity igniting that denied connection anew. In her words, he heard echoes of the old lore, the Deuce's chosen, pathfinders who wove destinies from the unseen threads of fate. His own lineage spoke of such gifts, lost to wars and forgotten rites, but here it manifested in this broken Omega, her eyes alight with a purpose she had never claimed. "You see what others cannot," he said softly, the realization settling like snow on his shoulders, heavy with implication. She was no mere survivor. She was the key, a beacon to navigate the fractured alliances that threatened his throne. The Stormclaw traitors hunted him still, their spies infiltrating packs like this one, but with her gift, paths to victory or escape unfurled. Nisara met his gaze, the bond tightening, empathy weaving through the fear she had rationalized away. His melancholy mirrored her exile, two souls adrift in a world of chains and ashes. Yet doubt lingered, a thorn in the heart. Was this destiny's hand, or another illusion born of desperation? The wind carried a distant uivo, sharper now, drawing nearer, and in that sound, she felt the weight of choices yet to come, refuge turning to revelation, as the flames of judgment gathered on the horizon. What was strength, if not trusting the light that guided through the dark? The sun climbed higher, a pale disk veiled by thinning clouds, casting long shadows across the tundra's frozen expanse. Nisara crouched at the overlook's edge, the wind tugging at the edges of Valen's cloak, still draped over her shoulders, its fur matted with the night's remnants, blood, snow, and the faint, lingering warmth of his body. Her bare skin prickled beneath it, not from cold alone, but from the awakening hum in her veins, that ancient intuition uncoiling like roots seeking soil after a long winter's dormancy. The Pathfinder's gift, once dismissed as a child's fancy or the pack's whispered curse, now pulsed with clarity, mapping the world in invisible lines. The scouts' trails snaking through the pines below, their scents sharp as iron on the breeze, converging like wolves on a wounded stag. Valen's breath was steady beside her, a counterpoint to the rapid flutter in her chest. He scanned the valley, his gray eyes narrowing against the glare off the snow, but she saw further, threads of fate weaving through the landscape, revealing hidden crevices in the ridge where ambush might lurk, or safe descents veiled by drifts. It was no sorcery of spells, but a lunar inheritance tied to the Deuce's phases, stirring strongest under skies like this. Fractured light, promising revelation amid the ruin. Her mother's locket, lost to the elder's grasp, had been its anchor, a silver crescent etched with runes that now echoed in her mind, glowing faintly in memory as if reclaimed. "You lead as if the land itself speaks to you," Valen said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the wind's mournful keen. He shifted closer, his armored shoulder brushing hers, the contact sending a shiver unrelated to the chill. In his gaze, she glimpsed not just the king's calculation, but a dawning awe, tempered by the melancholy that clung to him like frost on iron. He had spoken of his losses in the cave's hush, the queen's betrayal-forged death, the Stormclaw spies eroding his realm's edges like relentless tides. Yet here, in her unassuming presence, he sensed a pivot, a key turning in the lock of his fractured destiny. This sight, it is the old gift, isn't it? The Deuce's pathfinders, guides through the unseen storms. Nisara's throat tightened, the words pulling at scars deeper than the blizzard's cuts. She had buried that part of herself after the pack's scorn, after they branded her visions as omens of discord, unfit for an Omega bound to submission. But now, with the valley's dangers unfolding before her inner eye, denial crumbled like thawing ice. "It was always there," she admitted, her voice gaining strength, laced with the raw edge of long-suppressed truth. Whispers in the fog, paths where none existed. They called it madness, chained it away with me. But it saved lives once, hunters lost in whiteouts, brought home under my sight. Her fingers traced the air unconsciously, as if drawing the locket's rune, and in that gesture, the gift surged. A vision flashed, sharp as a blade's edge. The Alpha's longhouse, its doors barred, but a side path through the frozen riverbed, unguarded, leading to the heart of the corruption. Valen rose slowly, his hand resting on her shoulder, the weight grounding yet electric, igniting that resisted pull between them. Empathy had rooted in the cave's peril, but this revelation deepened it, transforming curiosity into conviction. She was no broken exile to pity. She was the Deuce's instrument, a beacon to navigate the wars that had scarred him. His own bloodline whispered of such seers, queens who once steadied the ironwood throne against chaos, lost to the same betrayals that now hunted him. "You are the key," he murmured, the words heavy with realization, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that stripped away pretenses. "The Stormclaw Alliance frays my borders. Their assassins weave through packs like this one, turning loyalty to poison. But with your sight, we pierce the veil, expose the traitors, forge paths to reclaim what was stolen." The wind carried a sharper weavo then, closer, the scouts' forms materializing on the valley floor like shadows detaching from the snow. Nisara's gift sharpened the scene. 5 now, not 3, their axes glinting with purpose, fanning out toward the ridge's base. One bore the Alpha's mark, a branded wolf's head on his forearm, signaling not mere retrieval, but eradication. Fear coiled in her gut, but the intuition steadied her, revealing a narrow defile to their left, choked with boulders but traversable under her guidance. "They're coming for us both," she said, rising to match his stance, the cloak falling open to reveal the welts fading into scars on her skin. "The Alpha fears your presence. Whispers of a king could unravel his grip, but there's a way down, hidden, to the river's underbelly." Valen nodded, his melancholy yielding to resolve, the guilt in his chest alight with purpose. He had carried his queen's death as a solitary burden, but this Omega's emergence offered absolution, a chance to wield power not as conquest, but as justice. The bond thrummed, no longer denied but acknowledged in the shared pulse of survival, her vulnerability mirroring his isolation, their strengths intertwining like vines on ancient stone. He extended a hand, gauntleted fingers curling around hers, the touch warm against her chilled palm. Then we walk the path you see, together. They descended into the defile, her steps sure despite the ache in her limbs, the gift illuminating fractures in the rock where footing held firm. Snow sifted down in lazy spirals, catching the sunlight in prismatic halos, while the distant clamor of pursuit echoed like a gathering storm. Introspection wove through the urgency. What was destiny? If not the courage to claim a gift once chained? Nisara felt the Diusa's presence in the light's dance, the moon's echo even in daylight, affirming her rebirth from rejection's ashes. As they emerged near the frozen river, the village's silhouette loomed closer, its smoke trails twisting like accusatory fingers. Valen's grip tightened, his breath mingling with hers in the crisp air. The revelation hung between them, unspoken yet profound. She was his guide through the moral labyrinth ahead, where pack loyalties clashed with personal redemption. But shadows stirred along the riverbank, more foes drawn by the uivos, and the true test loomed, judgment's flames flickering on the horizon. What was mercy, if not the light that revealed the way through betrayal's dark? Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your... The river's frozen vein snaked through the valley like a scar etched by winter's indifferent claw. Its surface, a treacherous mirror reflecting the pallid sun and the encroaching shadows of the pines. Nisara's breath fogged the air as she and Valen pressed against the icy bank, the cloak's fur chafing her healing welts, a reminder of chains both literal and lingering. Her gift thrummed now, a steady pulse in her temples, unveiling the ambush's web. Figures melting from the tree line, not scouts but enforcers, their furs emblazoned with the Eldridge Alpha's snarling wolf. At their head strode Thorn Blackthorn, the pack's iron-fisted ruler, his bulk cutting through the snow like a battering ram, eyes burning with the feral gleam of one who brooked no rivals. Betrayal hung in the wind's bite, sharp as the axes they gripped. Thorn, who had once been Valen's uneasy ally in border skirmishes, now twisted by Stormclaw whispers into a venomous foe. Valen's hand tightened on hers, his gauntlet cold against her skin. Yet the contact anchored her amid the rising dread. The melancholy that shadowed his features hardened into resolve, the guilt of past failures fueling a quiet fury. He had ridden these lands seeking fractured loyalties to mend, not ignite. But Thorn's treachery, selling pack secrets to the Stormclaw assassins for a promise of power, mirrored the blade that had felled his queen. He was kin once, Valen murmured, voice a gravelly undertone laced with sorrow, as they crouched behind a drift of snow-crusted boulders. Oaths sworn under the moon, broken for scraps of dominion, this confrontation. It ends the rot. Nisara's heart hammered, the Pathfinder's sight fracturing the scene into vivid threads. Thorn's path, direct and brutal, flanked by betas whose scents carried the sour tang of fear-masked ambition. Her own past surged like blood from an old wound, the ritual circle where Thorn had condemned her, his growl declaring her refusal a threat to the pack's fragile unity. He had chained her not for defiance alone, but to silence the whispers of her gift, which might expose his dealings with the rival clan. Freedom tasted bittersweet on her tongue. She could flee now, slip into the river's hidden bends her intuition revealed, leaving this king to his wars. Yet the bond with Valen pulled taut, resisted no longer but woven into her choices. Love as a forge, not a balm. Demanding she stand against the shadows that had nearly claimed her soul. They rose as one, stepping into the open where the river's gleam betrayed no mercy. Thorn halted paces away, his enforcers fanning out in a semicircle, axes lowered but ready, the steel catching sunlight in lethal prisms. Snow crunched under boots, the only sound before the Alpha's laugh rumbled, deep and mocking, echoing off the frozen banks. "The Wanderer King graces our wastes," Thorn sneered, his voice thick with the pack's guttural dialect, eyes flicking to Nisara with predatory disdain. And dragging our refuse with him. The Omega's chains were a kindness, her visions poisoned the bloodline. Return her, Ironwood, and perhaps I'll forget your trespass. Valen's stance was unyielding, sword half drawn, the blade's edge whispering against the scabbard like a withheld judgment. His gray eyes held thorns, unflinching, the scar on his jaw tightening with restrained rage. Kindness? You left her to the goddess's teeth, Thorn. For what? Stormclaw gold? I smell their treachery on your breath, the same that felled my borders. The words hung heavy, a philosophical gauntlet. What was power, if not the illusion that devoured its wielder? Empathy flickered in Valen's chest, a melancholic ache for the ally Thorn might have been, untainted by ambition's blight. But guilt demanded action, redemption not in blind war, but in excising the corruption that echoed his own losses. Nisara stepped forward, her bare feet sinking into the snow's numbing bite, the cloak parting to reveal the fading bruises like badges of survival. The wind whipped her hair, carrying the faint, coppery scent of impending blood, and her gift surged, illuminating Thorn's flank. A traitor among his own, a beta whose eyes darted nervously, Stormclaw ink hidden beneath his cuff. You fear what you cannot chain, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. The words a revelation drawn from intuition's depths. My sight sees your deals, Alpha, the maps you traded, the assassins you sheltered. The Diusa reveals all under her light. The enforcers shifted, murmurs rippling like cracks in ice, doubt seeding in their ranks as her words struck true. Thorn's face twisted, fury blooming red against the white expanse, and he lunged, axe arcing in a brutal swing. Valen met it with a clash that rang like thunder over the tundra, steel sparking blue in the cold air. The fight erupted visceral and raw, blades slicing air, snow erupting in crimson sprays as Valen disarmed one beta with a precise thrust, his movements a dance of ethical precision, sparing where possible, lethal only to the unrepentant. Nisara dodged a grasping hand, her gift guiding her steps through the fray, leading Valen to the traitor's side. There, she gasped, pointing, and he struck, not to kill, but to wound, exposing the branded arm that confirmed her vision. The battle's chaos wove introspection through the blood and shouts. Nisara grappled with the moral precipice, her hand closing on a fallen dagger, its hilt warm as if kissed by inner fire. Freedom beckoned in flight, away from this vortex of pack vendettas, yet love, for this king who saw her not as chattel, but as equal, demanded confrontation. Forgiveness? A lie for the weak. War, a chain of its own. Thorn roared, breaking through to seize her arm, his grip bruising, breath hot with rage. You'll die for this heresy, girl. But Valen was there, wrenching him back, their clash a storm of grunts and sliding steel on the ice. As Thorn fell to one knee, blood staining the snow in deep crimson blooms, his eyes met Nisara's, pleading now, the Alpha's mask cracking to reveal a man hollowed by his choices. Mercy, he rasped, the word a philosophical fracture. The enforcers hesitated, weapons lowering. The pack's loyalty fraying under the weight of exposed truth. Nisara's chest tightened, the dilemma ethical and spiritual, spare him and invite endless pursuit, end him and become the monster they feared. Valen's gaze sought hers over the melee, his expression a mirror of her turmoil, guilt warring with justice, love urging compassion over conquest. She raised the dagger, the blade trembling in the wind's howl, the moon's distant echo in the sun's glare, urging revelation. Blood or mercy? The choice hung, a spiritual precipice where rebirth awaited, but at what cost to the soul? What was forgiveness, if not the war within that spared the blade's final kiss? The dagger's hilt burned in Nisara's palm, its weight a counterfeit of the chains that had bound her to the post, now transformed into an instrument of reckoning. Snowflakes spiraled lazily from the graying sky, dusting Thorn's kneeling form like premature ash, his blood seeping into the river's frozen crust in dark, meandering veins. The enforcers encircled them, their breaths ragged clouds in the chill, axes hovering in uncertain grips as the exposed traitor's branded arm gleamed accusingly under the sun's indifferent gaze. Valen's sword tip rested at Thorn's throat, a silver thread poised to sever the last frayed oath, but his eyes, storm-gray and shadowed by ghosts, sought hers, mirroring the tempest raging within her chest. The wind moaned through the pines, carrying the faint, metallic tang of blood and the distant weevo of wolves scattering into the wilds, as if the Dusa herself recoiled from the unfolding judgment. Nisara's gift pulsed sharper now, not just paths through snow, but fractures in souls. Thorn's ambition, a hollow cavern eroded by Stormclaw promises, echoing the pack's collective rot that had exiled her. She saw the Alpha not as monster alone, but as a man forged in the same relentless winters, his cruelty a desperate grasp at control amid whispers of invasion. Freedom tugged at her, slip the blade away, vanish into the river's bends where her intuition promised sanctuary, leaving this king to his throne's burdens. Yet the bond with Valen anchored her, a quiet fire kindled in the cave's embers, demanding she weigh love against the liberty of solitude. Was it compassion to spare, or cowardice? War's cycle spun eternal, but redemption whispered of breaking it, even if the cost stained her hands. Thorn's gaze lifted, no longer feral but fractured, the Alpha's pride crumbling like hoarfrost under boot. "Nisara," he rasped, the name a plea laced with the pack's ancient dialect, his voice cracking on the wind. The rituals, they were for survival. Stormclaw's shadow lengthens. I bartered to shield us. Lies threaded his words, but truth bled through. The fear of a leader watching his kin starve under endless raids, the moral mire where power devoured mercy. One enforcer stepped forward, his axe lowering fully, eyes flickering with doubt as Nisara's revelation rippled outward. "The maps he sold," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her arm, the dagger's edge catching sunlight in a prismatic warning. "They lead assassins to Valen's borders, to innocence like the queen he lost." The words hung, philosophical barbs. What was loyalty, if not the courage to refuse the blade's easy path? Valen tensed beside her, his free hand brushing her elbow, a touch that grounded without commanding, empathy flowing through the contact like warmth from hidden springs. His melancholy deepened, the guilt of his own past betrayals surfacing in the lines of his face, the scar along his jaw a pale echo of wounds yet to heal. He had come to these fringes seeking alliances, not annihilation, but Thorn's treachery mirrored the storm-clawed dagger that had pierced his heart 2 winters past, leaving a kingdom adrift. Sparing this Alpha might invite endless pursuit, a war that consumed them both. Ending him could forge peace, but at the price of becoming the tyrant he despised. Love for Nisara urged restraint, her presence a balm to his isolation, yet duty roared for justice, the ethical precipice where kings faltered. "Choose," he murmured to her, low and resonant, the word a shared burden. "The Diusa's light reveals, but the hand that wields it is yours." The air thickened, the sun dipping toward the horizon, casting the valley in elongated shadows that clawed at the snow like grasping fingers. Nisara's breath hitched, the Pathfinder's sight unveiling one final thread. Forgiveness, not as weakness, but as a lunar rite, binding wounds into strength. Thorn's enforcers murmured, some sheathing weapons, the pack's frayed unity splintering under the weight of truth. She lowered the dagger, not in surrender, but deliberation, the blade's tip tracing a shallow line across Thorn's collarbone, drawing a thin crimson bead that mirrored the frozen jewels from her exile. "You chained me for your secrets," she said, her tone woven with tragic resolve, the wind whipping her hair like a banner of rebirth. "But the Deusa does not demand blood for every sin. Swear to the moon, expose the stormclaw rot, or the flames will claim you as they nearly did me." Thorn's chest heaved, defiance warring with desperation in his eyes, but the exposed brand on the traitor's arm, now bound and groaning at their feet, sealed his silence. He nodded, ragged and broken, the Alpha's growl reduced to a whisper of capitulation. The enforcers shifted allegiance in murmurs, some kneeling in the snow, the confrontation ebbing not into slaughter, but uneasy truce, a moral pivot where war yielded to wary peace. Valen sheathed his sword, the click echoing like a gavel's fall, his hand finding hers fully now, fingers interlacing in a grip that spoke of union forged in fire's shadow. Relief washed through Nisara, mingled with the ache of unresolved scars. Love accepted, not as reward, but as the hard-won choice between destruction and fragile dawn. Yet as Thorn rose unsteadily, barking orders to his wavering pack, a deeper shadow stirred on the ridge above. Riders cresting the horizon, stormclaw banners fluttering like vultures' wings against the fading light. The true rival approached, assassins no longer whispered but manifest, drawn by the fray's echo. Nisara's gift flared, mapping their descent, a gauntlet of ice and ambush awaiting. The judgment lingered, incomplete, its ethical thorns twisting towards sacrifice or salvation. What was rebirth, if not the mercy that tempered the storm's fury? The sun bled into the horizon, a crimson wound staining the tundra's endless white, as the Stormclaw riders thundered down the ridge like harbingers of forgotten oaths. Their banners snapped in the gathering dusk, black wolves rampant on fields of storm gray, the wind carrying their war cries, raw, guttural howls that clawed at the soul. Nisara's hand slipped from Valen's, the warmth of his touch lingering like an echo of hearth fire, as her gift unfurled in a cascade of silver threads, paths of ambush weaving through the river's bends. The riders' flanks exposed where the ice cracked, treacherous under iron-shod hooves. The air thickened with the scent of pine resin and distant smoke, the Deusa's moon rising pale and watchful, her light fracturing on the snow like shattered vows. Thorn's enforcers scattered at the first clash, their fragile truce dissolving into chaos as arrows whistled from the tree line, felling 2 betas in sprays of arterial red that steamed against the frost. The Alpha himself bellowed a retreat, his form vanishing into the pines with a handful of loyalists, but not before his eyes met Nisara's one last time. Fractured, pleading, the weight of his capitulation a silent confession. He had sworn to the moon, yet the Stormclaw tide revealed the depth of his rot. Not mere bartering, but a full surrender of borders, maps etched with the blood of Valen's kin. The revelation burned in her chest, hotter than the guilt that had once chained her spirit. Compassion's edge had dulled, but justice's blade sharpened, demanding the final severance. Valen moved like shadowed thunder, his sword a blur of ancient steel as he cleaved through the vanguard, each strike measured, ethical in its precision, sparing the coerced, damning the branded assassins whose eyes gleamed with fanatic zeal. Blood arced in viscous arcs, painting the snow in deepening crimson blooms that the wind scattered like sacrificial petals. Nisara pressed against a boulder, the river's chill seeping through her soles. Her gift guiding her not to flee, but to weave through the fray. A narrow crevice here, a drift to topple there, turning the terrain into an ally. The bond between them thrummed visceral now, no longer resisted, but embraced in the heat of peril. Love as the forge of rebirth, tempering her exile into unyielding resolve. His glance found her amid the tumult, gray eyes alight with melancholic fire, the scar on his jaw a silver rune under the moon's ascent. In her he saw absolution, in him she glimpsed destiny's cruel mercy. A Stormclaw captain broke through, his axe whistling toward Valen's flank, but Nisara lunged, the fallen dagger from Thorn's clash, now an extension of her will. It sank into the rider's thigh, not lethal, but crippling. Her intuition revealing the vital knot of tendon beneath fur and leather. The man howled, tumbling into the snow, and Valen finished the mercy with a swift thrust, his breath ragged as he pulled her close. "The pack's heart is poisoned," he growled, voice laced with the sorrow of inevitable ends, the guilt of his queen's shadow urging him onward. Thorn's oaths were smoke. "The Deusa demands cleansing." She nodded, the wind tearing at her cloak, exposing the faded welts like badges of trials endured. Faith against despair crested in her veins, the Pathfinder's light illuminating not escape, but confrontation's sacred cost. As the riders faltered, their charge splintering on the river's unforgiving ice, Nisara's sight pierced deeper. The village longhouse, its thatched roof a tinderbox of hidden Stormclaw caches, maps and blades stowed in the elders' chambers. The corruption festered there, roots entwined with the pack's silence during her exile, their approval a complicit chain. Union with Valen demanded sacrifice, not of flesh alone, but of illusions clung to in desperation. She pressed a stolen torch to the frozen bank, the flames leaping greedy as the first cracks spiderwebbed the ice, swallowing 2 riders in a glacial maw. "Burn it," she whispered, her voice a poetic dirge amid the clash, handing him a vial of oil from a fallen foe. "Let the fire be rebirth, not vengeance." Dawn crept reluctant over the peaks as the last Stormclaw banner crumpled into the snow, its bearer fleeing into the wilds with broken howls. Valen and Nisara crested the ridge together, the village below stirring in false peace, smoke from mourning hearths curling like supplicant prayers. Thorn's longhouse loomed central, its wooden beams etched with lunar runes now profaned by treachery. The king's hand trembled not from fatigue, but ethical weight, his melancholic gaze seeking hers in the paling light. "This ends the cycle," he said, the words a vow etched in blood and frost, his free arm encircling her waist, a union forged in the crucible of choice, power yielding to compassion's quiet roar. She leaned into him, the Pathfinder's gift affirming the right, flames as the Deuce's judgment, cleansing without scream, only the hush of renewal. He hurled the torch, oil igniting in a whoosh that devoured the thatch, flames blooming orange and voracious against the white expanse. The pack emerged in confusion, elders and kin spilling from huts, their cries swallowed by the inferno's roar. No slaughter followed. Valen had commanded his guards to herd them to the borders, exiles in their own lands. The fire's hunger selective, devouring the heart of corruption while sparing lives twisted by it. Thorn watched from afar, a silhouette against the blaze, his nod a final fracture of pride, vanishing into the dawn's embrace. Nisara felt the heat on her face, a sensory baptism washing away the blizzard's bite, her mother's lost locket manifesting in memory's glow, a crescent of silver light within, symbol of paths reclaimed. By nightfall the village was ash and silence, drifts reclaiming the blackened bones of beams under the full moon's serene vigil. Nisara awakened in Valen's arms within a new encampment, far from the wastes, her body mended by salves and time, but her spirit alight with justice's quiet triumph. Survival was no mere breath, it was the world's recasting, rejection transmuted into royalty. He brushed a strand from her brow, his touch tender amid the tragedy's embers, love accepted as redemption's proof. 2 souls renascent, bound not by chains, but by the Deuce's weaving threads. The wind sighed approval, carrying faint weavos of distant packs, the tundra vast and unscarred, promising horizons where mercy crowned the fallen. What was destiny, if not the fire that forged freedom from the ashes of despair? If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.